Hello, this is Dr. Jean, dear future people. Now, I hope that what I am about to talk about today for you seem trivial. But in 2022, this is new. In fact, it is so new if people understood this, this might give rise to a conceptual revolution. But of course, they do not and they are not willing to listen. They play around with their little toys. They modify their concepts a little bit, but fundamentally, they retain their worldview, they retain their fundamental concepts without digging deeper. Well, we are not going to make that mistake today. We are going to introduce a few new concepts and we will try to understand what is the significance of a different model, a radically different model, and try to see where it leads us, where it may find usefulness in real life. Well, in the last few videos, we were talking about an infinite reality which is modeled as a high variability matrix, like a high impact field. And if we understand what that means, then we realize that if, in fact, reality is not homogeneous, it does not necessarily have a centrality and simple symmetry. And of course, we are talking here both figuratively and literally. Then the direction of mind activity is crucial because the mind here is like a torchlight directed into infinite darkness, so that it's not going to be indifferent in terms of patterns to the direction that you are looking. So if you look this way, you're going to see something significantly very different than if you look that way. So if you are a scientist, you are going to see something radically different than if you're a cleaning lady or you are a poet. Why is that? Because space, time, and the essential organic nature of the mind is not indifferent to the direction you're looking. And the patterns are going to be dependent on the direction. So if you defined the world as the totality of what the mind is aware of, and this totality can be relative to an individual or a group of individuals or an entire community of the living, then the chosen direction of your attention, of what you are interested in, where you are going, what direction you chose, is going to be extremely important in developing your worldview. You see, the mind's capacity, be it an individual mind or a group mind or a community mind, is finite. Awareness can be extended mechanically. So in other words, you can always assume that if you look this direction, then largely you are going to see something extremely similar compared to when you look to that direction. But that would be only true if you considered only a low number of factors. In other words, you assumed a low dimension infinity, a low impact field, a low variability matrix. But if you are willing to go a step higher and dig deeper, then you would understand that you cannot cannot make those extensions. And if you make those extensions, they come at a price. So we call focus a concentrated attention where you narrow down your attention and therefore you have more resolution, you have a more intense focus of mind activity on a small area of space-time, but that comes at a price of narrowing down your perspective. So it is exactly narrow perspective that creates the illusion of a separate, distinct existence, because as you are focusing on something and not focusing on other things, you simply ignore the organic togetherness, the organic unity between this part of an organic spacetime and that part of an organic spacetime, simply because of your narrow attention. Now, structurally, what you are going to get is what we call a unit. Functionally, what you're going to get is what we call a system. In other words, patterns that are relatively different from their surroundings. So if your attention span is more wide and less focused, then you might miss fine details, and you will. So your resolution is going to suffer, but then your perspective is going to be more narrow, more wide, less narrow. So what that's going to mean is that you're going to consider more the complexity, the influence of one organic part of reality and another. So if you then focus on a relationship, in other words, the association of one variable and another, then you're going to get to the concept of a function, be it a mathematical function or another function that you may use in real life, which is of course a mathematical model, but you use it in real life. So if you focus on multiple relationships, multiple functions, then you get a pattern. And if your attention is focused on multiple relationships in time, so in other words, for a prolonged period of time, then you are going to get a system, which a system is really a continuation of patterns, a functional unit in space-time. So now we defined your worldview, which is going to be very dependent on the direction of the mind, and of course, you know, what you consider a mind, be it an individual mind, group mind, community mind. You also now understood what we mean by system and how it relates to attention span and versus perspective. We defined what we mean by system, by patterns, by function, and attention in general. So the mind, the attention, the focus, the interest, of course, may not be relative to an individual. It could be group mind, group attention, group focus, or community mind, community attention, and community focus. So interest will be then defined as a relatively permanent focusing of mind function on specific directions. Okay, remember? Forest, mushrooms, etc. Okay. So now we are going to play with words a little bit, and we are going to call a divine state of mind a very high community level thinking. That means that your mind function is going to be very general, and your perspective is going to be very, very wide. And that, of course, will mean that you do not have a specific focus, you do not have a limited interest because your perspective is very high. And your perspective is allowed to be high because here you are not talking about an individual mind function, but you are talking about the mind function of a whole community coordinated together. You see, this thing is a function of social cooperation, but more about that later. So let's give us an example here. You have a liver cell with a specific function, a local environment, changing conditions, creating an obligatory focus, interest, attention span, because it's a liver cell. Of course, between liver cell and liver cell, there are huge differences, but we are kind of simplifying here. But the liver cell is also part, a significant part, an organic part, an irreplaceable part of the body. So you may not only have a liver cell awareness, but you also have a whole body awareness. Remember what we said about organism. An organism can appear at any scale. Cell scale, molecular scale, galactic scale, it doesn't matter. So now you have a whole body awareness. You do not take into account only the narrow perspective appearing locally, but also you widen your perspective together with other cells. Cell, body, community, ecosystem, and beyond. Again, there's no limit to this. So organism can come at any scale. So your divine attention is going to mean that you do not have particular separation of interest. You do not have limited interest. You have a totally general interest, according to your limitations. And that comes with universal mind coordination without a specific focus. So in other words, you have to have some kind of coordination between mind activities. And remember, coordination, like mathematics, can provide such a coordination, or any kind of group activity can help in this. And so you have a higher perspective without separation of locality, and that we are going to call divine attention, divine state of mind. So here is an example. If you travel very, very slow at a very, very low speed, then time is going to be a huge factor for you. But if your speed is extremely high, then time is going to be a minor factor. You see, if your attention span is very high, it's a community, a social, a very wide attention span, then the small local interests are going to be very important, but not separated anymore. So a very high mind activity, highly coordinated, highly organized mind activity may eliminate individual perspectives, individual attention span, individual interests, and individual focus. The uniqueness of such things remain, but the separation, the exclusiveness of the perspectives and interests are going to disappear. So if that is the case, then reality will become less spotty, and span, limitation, and direction is going to decrease. Why? Because you have an organized whole at a higher level. Once again, this does not eliminate uniqueness. Local uniqueness remains, but local perspectives are not going to be exclusive, and they are not going to be separate. So here is what we are talking about. You have here on the left-hand side, here, a kind of torchlight. So you're looking at one particular direction with a certain span of what you can, shed light to. And you have a more general attention here, an organic attention with a wider span. So, attempts toward a divine state of mind may be all these things based on mind coordination: mathematics, rituals, games, religious activity, tradition, art, science, etc. These are all attempts at mind coordination so that you have group level mind activity, an organic mind activity, like mind was a wider scale, a higher scale, an organism. And that is very good. The problem with these, when these things come at the price of simplification. So you have separations, exclusiveness, and simplifications. Because if mind coordination comes at a price of simplicity, then you are going to pay a very high price for that. And we are going to talk about that later. So if you use coordination of the mind in a limited area, we call that a mind exercise. Remember, we talked about mind exercise in our first few videos in the introduction. And that's going to be very important. You have to exercise your mind. If you have coordination of mind in general, so now you are not talking about the individual level, then you will have a community spirit. You have unity, you have strength coming out of a community spirit. If you have coordination in mind in specific areas of interests, then you have a transitional community spirit. Like, for example, you may have a professional association focusing on one area. Okay, and that's very important and that's very good. But again, it's kind of a limited coordination with a limited span. If you have coordination of mind in general, that's going to be time indifferent. That's going to mean that you are developing a culture. More than a civilization, a culture, okay? Based on traditions, rituals, whatnot. So, coordination of mind is a very good thing, but again, it can be performed at various levels. And if your level is very simplistic, based on simple rules and simplifications, then you're going to run into problems. But if your coordination is very sophisticated, then you are going to approximate organicity, and the level of mind activity is going to be much higher, much more sophisticated, and much more satisfying. So a high mental activity on a high energy level, this is taking things to the extreme. So in other words, this is like a kind of a direction. It's kind of an ideal. Okay, so you will have ultimately no direction, no span, no limitations, and more importantly, no separate interest. What does this mean? So a divine state of mind is indifferent in terms of direction because it does not need a simplistic rule to understand complexity and variety. It understands complexity and variety, but it is able to see at all directions. So that is the goal, that is the ideal. And of course, with respect to such an extremely wide perspective, separated interests, individual points are going to be important, even essential, but they're not going to be valid if they are really separated out. They're going to be valid as local uniqueness that is non-separate, that is in organic relationship with everything else. So the mind can be cultivated like a garden. And then the more organization you have due to cultivation, the wider perspective you're going to get. But this cultivation is not necessarily at an individual level. You know, this could be at a community level, a group level, a society level. It's just cultivation. It requires high maintenance, but it may achieve a high degree of organicity, yes. And then we are going to define heaven as a cultivated garden with very high organicity. So heaven, of course, here is a metaphor. It's a state of mind where you really are going to feel very good. Why? Because you are natural. You do what is meant to be done. You understand the organicity of reality, and with your mind, you feel that organicity. So here, heaven is not a fixed place. It's not a fixed state, and definitely not a separate place and a separate state. You see, it's a direction, it's an ideal. A garden needs maintenance, constant work, planning, and a lot of thought. So it's not like you achieve here a very beautiful garden, and then that state of the garden is going to be permanent and separated out. No, you are going to cultivate your garden. With that, you are going to also influence the environment of the garden, even spread the garden, okay? But the garden changes. It's not permanent. It's not fixed, okay? It's the constant work, the constant planning, the constant review, the constant maintenance that makes it possible for the garden to survive. Organicity is not a given. It needs to be constantly recreated and reformed as it changes. It is not fixed. So it is not a given. It is not a present. It is not a great gift. You see? Organicity is not something different that is coming to us from somewhere else. No. Organicity is us. Organicity is here. But organicity is not given even here. You see, we are not given. We need to work on it constantly. Okay? So organicity is complex dynamic relationship that function together to keep the system alive and keep the system organic. But again, it is not a given. So on the left-hand side, you have a symbolism of a distant, beautiful place, which is fixed, which is permanent, and which is separate from your reality. And on the right-hand side, you see something that is here and that we need to work on. And so in Vitologia, heaven is not something on the left-hand side. It's more something on the right-hand side. So you need to work on it. And again, we are talking about something that is not fixed, not static, not homogeneous. It's not a given. It's not a gift. It does require active effort and thought. It's constantly changing. It's dynamic. It's heterogeneous. Okay, and it requires high maintenance. And the order that exists there is not the pure, simplistic, few-dimensional uniformity, but it's harmony by organicity. It's a functional coordination with a high degree of variety and dynamism. In other words, it's alive. You see, if you have coordination at the price of simplicity, some people call it pure state, you know, like a pure system. Then you're going to run into the problem of reductionism. You reduce the natural complexity of things. We're not talking about that. We are talking about an organic order where you do not need to reduce things, you do not need to ignore things, but you see order in the organic complexity of nature. So again, on the left-hand side, we have a cadaver. And we try to understand the complexity of the human body by dissecting a cadaver. Okay? But what we are talking about as organicity is more what is on the right-hand side. Okay? It's not a cadaver, it's a living system with multiple level feedbacks and multiple level and multi-directional relationships. Uh, and you have a lot of factors, a lot of dynamic changes, a lot of patterns. And these organic patterns, okay, do not separate out. One is not independent of the other. So, an organic mind will have to be robust because it sees things through a lot of different angles. And so the more you see things from the point of view of this angle and that angle and that angle, then you will see the uniqueness of things. Okay? And if you have one very strong influence on you, you're going to put that in its place because you will never lose your perspective. You will never neglect other influences. You see, there's not just one influence, one even very important variable that changes, but there are other variables, and you are always aware of all the other variables. So it transcends the individual unit with scope and interest, providing a wide perspective. So you understand that the individual human mind is an organic part of a higher organism. Okay, and there's no limit to how high you go in terms of scale, because organism is everywhere. So it sees things with organic attention, understanding complex and dynamic relationships, yes. Variations, transitions, changes need flexible and robust attention. So you understand that all of a sudden you have an unexpected change. Then that's going to draw your attention to a new variable. And you are willing to consider that new variable. That's what flexibility means. Tradition and culture is organic. Tradition and culture are alive. They're not fixed. And so order is also complex, robust. It requires coordination, yes, but minimally so. You do not need that simplistic type of coordination with everything being fixed and standard. So from this point of view of direction of the mind and organic thinking, we're going to introduce a new name for local uniqueness, and we are going to call that the soul seed. Now, a soul seed here emphasizes that local uniqueness is alive. It's organic. It's like an organic part. So locality is organic and alive. So even the tiniest deviation from the routine path of beliefs requires extra energy. Oh, yes. So to understand something new, you think it's easy. No, it's not easy. This energy requirement grows exponentially as the distance from the path. So it is extraordinarily easy to imitate. And imitation, emulation, they always mean that you take over something, even take over something uncritically. It could be a perspective, a point of view, etc. Okay? But that comes at a very high price. You take the path of least resistance and you put little effort in it, so it's comfortable. But you can be comfortable on the surface, and deep inside you will see that something is not right. You suppress it, but it's going to come up sooner or later. Okay? You cannot do those things. You cannot delegate out your perspectives. If you do that, you're going to run into problems. I guarantee you that. So you cannot do that. You have to have the energy and the willingness, okay, to see things from a local perspective, because these local perspectives are necessary, they are natural, they are even organic. So, as common beliefs adopted to local environments are adapted to local environments, then a tension arises between local conditions that are unique, like building a road straight through a mountain peak. Okay, so you always have to adjust these common beliefs to the local environment. Unadjusted extension may be termed linear extrapolation. We already talked about that. So what this means is that you cannot mechanically extend common beliefs. If you do that, then you are going to get into trouble. Local environments create unique conditions and unique local patterns. Locality here, of course, means both space and time. What does this mean? That when we are talking about locality, well, it sounds like it's a spatial thing. That something is like this here and it's not like this there. But we extend that to time also. Something is like this now and it's not like that 2 minutes later. Okay? So locality, the concept of locality also exists in time. So again, we already talked about that change and variations and transitions may be slow, and so slow that you may not detect them, but they might be there. And that creates a continuous space and a continuous time without specific points. Well, you can define points, but not separate points. Okay? And that's gonna mean a lot later on. So the local unique order, a peculiar special set of variations, combinations, and patterns is like a soul seed. It's like a unique individual or a unique group of individuals. You see, it is alive, it is organic, because it creates a very unique pattern which is in organic, inseparable relationship with the next organic pattern close to it. So, in terms of space-time, you might have a different focus in space and in time, and your focus may be larger or smaller than mine in space or in time. And this span, based on your focus and your perspectives, is unique to you or a group of you see. So focus creates intervals that are dependent on your resolution and attention span. These are artificial, imaginary methodological entities for better understanding. But the underlying uniqueness is not separate. The underlying uniqueness is continuous. It is like a potential manifesting in a peculiar way, in a unique way. So the soul seed has a potential. Think about an actual seed, like a fruit tree seed or apple seed or whatever, okay? It's not passive. You see, we are always talking about a combination of factors in a locality, be it in space or in time. But it's not passive. It's not a given thing. It is active. It changes and it influences. So it has an organic element. That is why this metaphor is used of soul seed, because it has a potential and a potential of influencing everything, its environment, everything else around it. So the effects actualize differently in each unique locality. If you have an effect that will have a specific distribution and a very specific influence, but also a very specific relationship, bi-directional relationship in a locality. So it's like the idea of a force field. It is uniform, it has different direction and magnitude in each space point that may change in time like a flow. It is not uniform. You think about it as uniform, but it is really not, because in every locality it manifests differently due to local conditions. So you have a magnetic field, but that magnetic field influences something, and that something also influences back the magnetic field. So that you think about it initially as a uniform thing, but it is not. And it's not just intrinsically and separately not uniform. It is not uniform because it's in a bidirectional relationship with what it interacts. So locality has no intrinsic objective boundary in either space or time. It is an artifact created by focus. Locality is a kind of unique thing, but it's like a special combination of things without separation. There would be separation only if one locality was largely independent from the next, but it's not. Okay, so it's a continuous influence, it's a continuous effect with transitions. So locality is unique and organic, yet not separate. So here is a rather crude manifestation, or let's say demonstration of what we're talking about. So you think about a human leg, right? A human extremity. And then you might think about it as, okay, it has a certain length, it has a certain, I don't know what, physical attributes. And then you just caught that thing as it was a dead object, okay? And you cut it here with a knife, etc. You make a straight line. But when you actually do that, okay, then you will see that you cut through influences, organic relationships, because this is not a dead thing. This is an organic thing, okay? So you cut through relationships. You cut through mutual influences. So this is an inorganic model. This is an organic model. So one locality and the next are not separate. They're not uniform and they are not separate. They are different, but they are in close organic relationship. So this is a dead reality. This is an organic reality. So with linear extrapolation, okay, you're going to get competition, tension, conflict, and this is going to be a natural price you have to pay for the simplification of linear extrapolation, because it's not only local uniqueness that you're going to ignore by linear extrapolation, but it's also organicity. Remember this? These things belong together organically. You cannot cut through them. Now, so when you have cancer, then you have uniformity growing mechanically, and that also destroys this organicity. You see, The whole idea of cancer is that it ignores organicity by ignoring signals that would be natural between one part of the body and another part of the body. So linear extrapolation of cancer can really come together. The common denominator being ignoring local organic uniqueness or ignoring the soul seed. So soul seed is a figure of speech drawing attention to the organic nature of uniqueness, the active, formative influences being manifested uniquely depending on local conditions. Locality is both in space and in time, and it is not in Vitologia. It's not an artificial interval in space or in time. You see, it's continuous, depending on your focus and your resolution and your attention span. So remember this? Okay. Now, we said that we can kind of decompose this to various units depending on our resolution, okay? But now we introduce the variable of time. You see, this is a fixed picture that is supposed to be permanent, in other words, uniform in time. But everything changes in time. So there's really nothing that stays the same. It is the idea of a picture, yes, that stays the same. But the reality behind it is not a picture. A picture is something fixed, artificially fixed. But in reality, this thing will be constantly changing. So we introduced here a whole series of concepts. And we try to emphasize that we really can only attempt to widen our perspectives. And we do that by coordination, but organic coordination of the mind. So we have less of a specific individual but separated perspectives. So we widen our horizons by basically communication and interactions, okay? And only then would we see a more complex order rather than an order that is based on simple rules, which would mean that largely if I go to the left, if I look at the right, then I would see largely the same things. And if you think about that, then you are going to see that rules and patterns and laws are not going to be indifferent to direction. You see? And if they are not, then you need, as an ideal, as a, taking things to the extreme for the sake of understanding type of thing, you would need totally organic, totally general, totally comprehensive organic attention. But you're never going to achieve that. You can't just work toward it. And because you have to work toward it, you need constant, complex, organic thinking with cultivation of the mind. Thank you for your attention and goodbye.